Hello, everybody, and top of the morning to you. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News, coming to you live from Warsaw. Kyiv and Odesa came under another Russian attack involving ballistic missiles and drones. According to local authorities, last night's attacks killed one person and wounded at least 8 more, while also damaging a maternity hospital. Explosions could be heard across the Ukrainian capital as air defense systems engaged incoming targets. As stated by Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko, one drone crashed in the Shevchensky district, igniting a residential building and wounding one person. At the same time, one drone crashed near a school in the Oblonsky district, and another struck an industrial building. The Russian army also targeted the Podilsky and Darnitsky districts, where medics and rescue teams are still working to assist victims and clear the area from debris. In total, 4 people were wounded in Russian strikes on the Ukrainian capital. Meanwhile, residents in Odesa also endured a tough night as Russian drones repeatedly struck the city. As stated by Odesa's governor, Oleg Kyper, the attack killed 1 person and wounded at least 4 more. The attack also destroyed an administrative building of an emergency medical station and damaged several ambulances. A maternity hospital was also hit. However, the staff and patients suffered no injuries. The war between Russia and Ukraine is accelerating as both countries develop greater attack capabilities, with one major difference. Ukraine strikes legitimate military targets, while Russia chooses to indiscriminately terrorize the civilian population. These remarks were made by Andreas Umland in conversation with TVP World.
All of this could have been, of course, avoided if Russia would have taken Zelensky's offer to go for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Then the attack on the strategic bombers would not have happened. The attack on the Crimea, so-called Crimea Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, would not have happened, and many other similar and perhaps less spectacular attacks would not have happened. The war is now accelerating in that both countries have more and more capabilities to strike the other country in the rear, and Ukraine does that, targeting military sites, and Russia does that by simply terrorizing the Ukrainian population and striking the cities, apartment houses, hospitals, universities, and so on.
In a speech at London's Chatham House think tank on Monday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte called for a 400% increase in air and missile defense to maintain a credible deterrence posture. This is to be one of the priorities for an alliance summit in The Hague held later this month.
And last week, NATO defense ministers agreed ambitious new targets. The exact details are classified, but we need a 400% increase in air and missile defense. We see in Ukraine how Russia delivers terror from above. So we will strengthen the shield that protects our skies. Our militaries also need thousands more armored vehicles and tanks, millions more artillery shells. And we must double our enabling capabilities, such as logistics, supply, transportation, and medical support. Allies will invest in more warships and aircraft. To give just one example, America's allies will procure at least 700 F-35 fighter jets in total. We will also invest in more drones and long-range missile systems, and invest more in space and cyber capabilities. It is clear, if we do not invest more, our collective defense is not credible.
A major development in Ukraine's air defense. Israel has quietly transferred Patriot missile systems to help shield the country from Russian attacks. Once used to protect Israeli skies, these U.S.-made systems are now reinforcing Ukrainian defenses. According to Israeli ambassador to Ukraine, Michael Brodsky, Patriot air defense systems once stationed in Israel and provided by the United States in the early 1990s have officially been transferred to Ukraine. Israel recently retired its Patriot units in favor of newer technologies. Now these redeployed batteries are helping Ukraine counter Russian missile threats. They are particularly effective against Russia's Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. While the transfer was not widely publicized, it marks a significant gesture of military support, contrary to claims that Israel has remained on the sidelines. In a surprising shift, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has called for increased pressure on Russia, stating that Moscow only responds to the language of force. Speaking to France's LCI television, Orbán emphasized the need for Europe is to boost its military power and to pursue long-term strategic agreement with Russia.
Vous espérez une sorte de grande révolution conservatrice en Europe?
Je l'espère. J'aimerais bien que ça se fasse.
I hope so. I'd love to see that happen, and I'm very happy for the United States. We are at the beginning of that. But unfortunately, we also have to see that President Trump is not the Messiah. He is only a fellow warrior. If we really want something for ourselves, we are the ones who have to work. That's why I'm opening up and why in Europe there is once again a Christian conservative majority. And that's an opportunity.
Well, that wasn't quite the soundbite, but we'll get to that later. Now, Lithuania's president is calling out Western leaders, particularly German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, for what he sees as an empty threat against Russia. In a recent interview with Bild, Gitanas Nausėda repeated warnings of sanctions without action are damaging the credibility of Ukraine's allies. The president pointed to delays in delivering promised weapons and ammunition as further evidence of wavering support and praised the Baltic and Nordic countries for their consistent backing of Ukraine, contrasting it with what he described as hesitation from larger powers. He also called for a more aggressive 18th EU sanctions package, including disconnecting all remaining Russian banks from the SWIFT system, targeting Russia's shadow fleet and expanding restrictions on energy companies like Gazprom and Rosatom. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced that the country will reach NATO's 2% defense spending target by the end of the year. While speaking at the University of Toronto, Carney said that Canada had to revitalize its military with new equipment such as drones, armed vehicles, and ammunition.
The additional $9.3 billion for this fiscal year, 2025-2026, will bring Canada in line with the 2% NATO target this year, half a decade ahead of the previous government's plan. We're a firm believer in NATO. And we're standing shoulder to shoulder with our NATO allies. We'll continue to do so. And of course, the United States is a fundamental ally of the country. We will importantly invest in military equipment, infrastructure, and technology by procuring new aircraft, armed vehicles, drones, and ammunition, as well as new sensors to monitor the seafloor and the Arctic.
Lies, deepfakes, and false documents, all in a coordinated Russian disinformation campaign designed to muddy the waters between Warsaw and Kyiv. This time, the target is a painful chapter in the neighboring states' shared history and Poland's next president.
It began with what looked like an official government document, a letter in Ukrainian, allegedly signed by Ukraine's Minister of Culture, Mykola Toczycki, claiming that Kyiv had suspended all exhumation work at the site of the Volhynia massacres in Puzhniki. On the same day, a Facebook video showed a well-known Polish academic confirming the news. He criticized Ukraine, accusing it of retaliation after the Polish parliament declared July 11th a National Day of Remembrance for Polish victims of the 1943-45 Volhynia massacres. But there was one problem. The whole thing was fake, and the Facebook account completely fabricated. It impersonated Professor Andrzej Osowski, Poland's lead forensic expert on Volhynia. He quickly took to social media to condemn the fake content. On X, Ossowski himself denied the footage, saying it was AI-generated and the statements were false and manipulated. He warned that the fake video damages the integrity of Polish-Ukrainian research and could mislead the public. Ukraine's Minister of Culture, Mykola Toczycki, also publicly debunked the letter, calling it entirely fake.
Warning, fake news. I did not sign any document regarding the alleged suspension of work in the town of Sadove, formerly Puzhniki, in the Ternopil Oblast. The party PL described the process as an historic and diplomatic breakthrough. Do not spread harmful propaganda.
The fake was carefully crafted and it worked. Using a fabricated profile and synthetic video, the campaign weaponized historical trauma and current politics to sow distrust. And experts believe the fingerprints point to none other than Russia. The target of the campaign? One of the most sensitive chapters in Polish-Ukrainian history, the Volhynia massacres, where over 100,000 Polish civilians were killed by Ukrainian nationalist forces during World War II. But the disinformation didn't just aim to divide nations. It could have meant to target Poland's president-elect Karol Nawrocki. A Eurosceptic, he has long accused Ukraine of stalling exhumations. In a June 7 interview with Hungarian outlet Mandiner, Nawrocki said Ukraine isn't ready for EU membership until it shows more respect for history and its neighbors.
I am against Ukraine's entry into the European Union at this moment. I recognize that we need to support Ukraine, but Ukraine must understand that countries such as Poland, Hungary, other European states have their own interests. Poland has specific interests, such as the exhumation in Volhynia.
His critics, though, claim Nawrocki's rhetoric clashes with Ukraine's EU ambitions.
The new Polish president's statement to the Hungarians over the weekend that he's not in support of Ukraine joining NATO or even the EU, a blow to the Ukrainians.
I'm not sure whether, on the whole, these past events should have a profound impact on Polish support for Ukraine.
The timing was no coincidence. Exhumations in western Ukraine resumed on April 24, the first since 2017, when Kyiv froze such works after UPA memorials were destroyed in Poland. And now, this fake news story, designed to look like a Ukrainian retaliation, risks inflaming tensions even more, painting a picture of unresolved wounds and rekindled mistrust. Diana Skaya for TVP World.
Poland's presidential election may have brought a right-wing president, but the country's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, says that the nation's commitment to Ukraine and the West remains unchanged. That assurance from Sikorski came in an interview with Politico. Sikorski stressed that Nawrocki, backed by the Conservative Law and Justice Party, supports Poland's defense strategy and shares a strong stance against the Kremlin. He underlined that, quote, the majority of defense contracts that we are now financing were signed under the previous government. The foreign minister also pointed to Nawrocki's ties with U.S. President Donald Trump and suggested this could strengthen Poland's diplomacy with both Washington and Budapest. Sikorski concluded by expressing confidence that Prime Minister Donald Tusk's government will secure a victory in Wednesday's vote of confidence. Will Poles finally see their astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski take off on the Falcon 9 for the AX-4 mission? This departure has been delayed once again. It's the third time now that the mission has been rescheduled. With more details, Piotr Orłowski is at the Kennedy Space Center in the United States.
Tomorrow at 8 in the morning Eastern Time is the current targeted launch time for the Axiom 4 mission. Polish astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski is one of the 4 crew members who are part of the mission. Due to the strong winds, the weather board at the Kennedy Space Center has decided to postpone the Falcon 9 launch for 24 hours. The weather is the only one factor holding the launch back, as the technical checks were completed successfully. Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski Zalewski uses his newfound time for the further rehearsed protocol, which can be useful after docking at the International Space Center. Research is the key part of the mission. Polish part of the project, called Ignis, is sponsored by the Polish government. Reporting from Kennedy Space Center, for TVP World, Piotr Orłowski.
Well, another delay, but the weather doesn't always agree. Well, that's all the time we have here on this edition of World News. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.